iconic workhorse that was beloved by rail enthusiasts and the public alike. That is what comes to mind when you ask somebody what they think about the 80 class railcar and its long history with Northern Ireland Railways. The 80 class was the poster child of the Northern Irish Railway network, and over its 50-year lifespan, it became as iconic to Northern Ireland as Tayto or Maine. But where did it come from? And better yet, why was it even devised in the first place? Today, we are going to find out just why this piece of rolling stock is so fondly remembered on FundTheNINE. In the late 1960s, the Ulster Transport Authority was finally dissolved and split into two new transportation companies, Ulsterbus and Northern Ireland Railways. The post-UTA rolling stock that the newly formed Northern Ireland Railways were left with were getting on a bit, and the majority of diesels they had were built in the 1950s, and what steam locomotives they had left were even older, dating back to the post-war period. In the early 1970s, NIR tried to remedy this issue by putting in an order with British Rail Engineering Limited, BREL, to construct 9 brand new diesel-electric multiple units to start the replacement of the ageing UTA stock. With 20 years of technological innovation since the last new diesels were employed on Northern Ireland Railway network, the new DEMUs, dubbed the 80 class, were fitted with all the modern fixings one would expect from a modern DEMU, such as electrical heating, lighting, toilets, hand washing facilities, fire protection systems and comfortable seating with ample room for rush hour passengers. But what about the technical side of things? How did these new DEMUs really work? Well, for starters, the diesel engines, produced by English Electric, were a power plant capable of throwing out 560 brake horsepower. The engine was situated behind the driver's cab in the power car and put its raw power through the electrical generator, which put out a total of 420 kilowatts. The electrical generator then generated an electrical current to which two EE538 bogie-mounted traction motors used to generate traction, thus moving the train along the tracks. The generator itself has two modes of electricity generation within it. The main generator, which is the primary source of power for the traction motors and the source of power for the train's heating systems. Then there is the auxiliary generator, which is the main source of electricity for the train's control equipment, compressors, fuel motor pump, etc. As for the traction motors, they came in pairs of 2 per motor bogie, with 1 motor bogie attached to each power car. The traction motors provide power to the wheels through a pinion on the armature shaft and a gear wheel on the main axle. The traction motors obviously generate a lot of heat whilst in use, so to combat overheating, a fan was attached to the armature shaft which rotates with the shaft itself, thus keeping the mechanism cool. These traction motors are able to apply different amounts of tractive effort by varying the electrical output of the generator in the power car. The layout of the new trains were also a great improvement. Firstly, the power car had the smallest number of seating available due to space consumed by the engine and electrical generator. The power car had a modest 45 seats, which was later reduced to 42 to provide wheelchair accommodation. The power car also featured a guard's compartment, which doubled as a parcel or luggage storage area. Secondly, the intermediate trailers had the most spacious seating arrangement, with the majority of them boasting 87 seats. However, a small handful had 62 seats, as they were converted Mark II carriages, but a couple of intermediates also had 2x2 seating. Both of these factors then led to the 62-seat format in some intermediate trailers. On top of that, the intermediate trailers were also fitted with an extra pair of doors to increase passenger flow and access convenience at stations. Finally, the driving trailers had a healthy 80 seats. They got their name from the fact that they were fitted with driving compartments at the end of the carriage. This driving cab was then offset to the left of the gangway, allowing for the 80 class to have anywhere up to a 9-car long set with driving trailers in the middle of the configuration, as passengers could freely walk through the entire train at their own leisure. The 80 class ended up being very similar to that of the former UTA 70 class, both mechanically and electrically, which ran on our railway network alongside the 80 class for over 10 years before withdrawal. This meant that maintenance crews would already have a good level of understanding on how to maintain this new addition to the NIR rolling stock. Following the design phase of the 80 class, it was then built in 2 batches. The first batch of 22 carriages were comprised of 9 power cars, 4 intermediate trailers and 9 driving trailers. These were built between 1974 and 1975. The second batch of 80 class carriages, 32 of them in total, were then constructed between 1977 and 1979. These carriages consisted of 13 power cars, 8 intermediate trailers and 11 driving trailers. Additionally, 11 other carriages were also acquired to fill the required capacity gaps. Consisting of 5 intermediate trailers and 6 driving trailers, these carriages were conversions of former NIR locomotive hulled stock and, formerly so, British rail carriages that were sold to NIR. All of the converted carriages were originally built in 1969, as per TransLink's official documents. The 80 class's entry to service was really a trial by fire. On top of the fact that our railway network was experiencing major neglect at the hands of the government, Northern Ireland was also in the midst of the Troubles. The Troubles brought with it a whole new kind of problem for the railways, as attacks on railway infrastructure became more and more common as terrorists regularly tried to disrupt the logistics of goods and people in the country. One incident in particular, on the 6th of July 1997, 9 masked men armed with various weapons hijacked 80 class number 82 as she pulled a 6-car set towards Lurgan railway station. The gang of men stopped the train and then boarded it, and then proceeded to petrol bomb all 6 of her carriages. By the time the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service arrived, there was little to be done to save the train. Thankfully though, no passengers were harmed in this attack. But despite these kinds of setbacks, the 80 class continued to prove to be the backbone of Northern Ireland's railway network, with the aforementioned carriages that were burned out re-entering service a short while after the attack. After the 80 class's arrival, it saw the ageing 70 class removed from duty and replaced with the more modern 450 class railcar, and through the 20th century, the 80 class was NIR's most popular people mover, featuring in many a poster or promotional artwork. Most notably, the 80 class was featured in a Belfast-themed Coca-Cola poster in the late 2000s. During the 80 class's long life, 3 3-car sets were also loaned out to Erin Road Erin for use on the Bray to Greystone service, Cork to Cove line, and Dublin to Maynooth service. The lease lasted from October of 1987 all the way until October of 1990. However, one set remained on the Greystone shuttle until the 26th of November 1990 as a stay of execution. Moving through the 1990s and the creation of TransLink, the 80 class were starting to show their age. Initially what was supposed to be a replacement for the MED and MPD railcars, which at the time of withdrawal were in service for 26 years each, by the turn of the millennium, the 80 class had matched that lifespan exactly, but plans for replacement were not even on the table yet. When TransLink was created to operate NI Railways and Ulsterbus, our railway network was a crumbling mess, begging for investment. Ravaged by the Troubles, government austerity and car dominance, getting the funds to fully replace these aging railcars was simply not possible. Instead, TransLink planned to refurbish the 80 class for a new millennium, and keep them in service alongside the 450 class until newer trains could be purchased, built and put in service. Just 2 years later, in 2002, TransLink put in its first ever rolling stock order, a procurement of 23 3-car DMUs dubbed New Trains. This tender was eventually awarded to Spanish railway manufacturing company CAF. CAF, which is an abbreviation of Construcciones y Auxiliar de Ferrocarriles, was founded in 1917 and was a relatively successful company throughout the 1900s. But when the real investment boom hit Spain during the 1990s, CAF seized the opportunity at hand, building new high-speed trains for the Spanish railway operator Renfe. They were even lucky enough to be able to export some units to Turkey, the company's first ever major international export. Over the span of 2 years since being awarded the tender by NIR, CAF set about designing the future of the Northern Ireland Railway network. But they never could have guessed that what they would eventually come up with would quickly become the new poster child of Northern Ireland Railways. In 2004, TransLink took delivery of the first new 3-car CAF sets, with the first 6 of them being fitted with continuous automatic warning systems, CAWS for short. This allowed these 6 units to operate in the Republic of Ireland in case of any issues or breakdowns with the Enterprise units, which later turned out to be the greatest example of foresight ever conceived. Through 2004 and into 2005, the rest of the new 3000 class sets were rolled out onto the network. Whilst this happened, it displaced one 80 class unit per every 3000, as the 3000 class was designed as a like-for-like replacement of the aging 80 class sets. The following year, in 2006, there remained a number of 80 class units still in service, as there was a deficit in rolling stock availability without them. Despite how old, worn and tired they had become, they were sorely needed. But this blatantly obvious wear and tear was now unavoidably abundant, and thus TransLink called for refurbishment again. Between 2006 and 2010, the remaining 80 classes were overhauled and fitted with more modern fixings such as central door locking mechanisms for enhanced safety. However, these refurbishments were merely a temporary measure to keep the rolling stock numbers up until TransLink were able to tender and procure more new rolling stock, and procure they did. After a Northern Ireland Assembly debate in 2007, in the midst of the 80 classes refurbishment, New Trains 2 was then decided upon with a near £140 million investment into TransLink to procure 20 new 3-car sets for use on the railway network. These new trains would then finally replace the remaining 80 class and 450 class units that were still in service with Northern Ireland Railways, and even expand the existing rolling stock availability by nearly 10. After a few years of designing, constructing and testing, the new 4000 class entered service in 2011. The 4000 class was essentially the cooler younger brother of the 3000 class, with its increased seating capacity and a head end that more resembled modern car manufacturing trends. The 4000 class was a breath of fresh air for Northern Ireland Railway network. But with all of this positive change, there loomed an air of sadness. With the 3000 and 4000 class sets now both fully operational, that meant that Northern Ireland's most beloved rolling stock was destined for the scrapyard. However, amidst the despair, an oddly backhanded second wind was offered before the 80 class. TransLink had their nice shiny new fleet of passenger stock, but one thing was missing: a dedicated locomotive that can help with routine leaf clearing in the autumn and the application of sandite, among other engineering purposes. All the way back in 2006, a number of 80 class cars awaiting withdrawal were refitted to be used to lay sandite along the railway network. For those of you who are unaware, sandite is a liquid substance that is made up of sand, antifreeze and steel shot. This is then sprayed directly onto the rails from a nozzle that is a few inches from the railhead. Sandite is the primary source of combating wheel slip in the UK and Ireland during the cold months, where leaves may fall onto the rails or condensation or rainwater may cause ice to form on the railheads. After the final 80 class was withdrawn from passenger service in September of 2011, the 80 class's bastardised sandite offspring continued to live on for many years. After a run of 5 more years, NI Railways finally took delivery of their new MPV, which was designed by Windhoff to be a modular locomotive capable of having different equipment attached to it no matter the task at hand. The primary of these tasks would be laying sandite and water jet blasting. 1 year later, in 2017, the 80 class thumped its final thump on our railway network. The time had come for it to be recited to the history books.
Now, 35 years ago, it was the latest thing in trains, but today saw the final journey for the Class 80 slam-door rail car, known to many as thumpers. For many years, these trains formed the backbone of the passenger rail fleet here. Since the introduction of new trains in 2005, however, the remaining Class 80 were only put to use on the Larne line.
But all was not lost. Ever since the 80 class refurbishment in 2006, the Downpatrick and County Down Railway had been starting to seriously consider taking on some of the DMUs as they rapidly approached their due date. Some board members of the DCDR were even brought to York Road to inspect the 80 class rail cars to determine which would suit their needs best, or in other words, which ones were the least rusty. But in the end, it was determined that such a procurement would not be viable until after the completion of the gallery project at the DCDR, as space at the Heritage Railway was in short supply. Then, a few years later, in 2012, the DCDR began negotiations with TransLink in order to secure the purchase and delivery of some of the withdrawn 80 class sets. However, a major issue with the procurement process was that the vast majority of the 80 class rolling stock was withdrawn from service due to major issues. Those issues varied from something as simple as structural damage that wasn't worth fixing, to sets being completely destroyed via accidents, bombings, or other more serious incidents. This meant that the only viable sets were those in use for Sandite duties, as they were actively being maintained by TransLink all the way up until their withdrawal in 2017. As such, it was then decided that the DCDR would purchase the Sandite 80 class units as they exited service. On Saturday the 12th of May 2018, the DCDR finally took delivery of the first two 80 class carriages, with the first two being Power Car 90 and Driving Trailer 752. Then, on Sunday the 13th of May 2018, they took delivery of the final two rail cars, those being Power Car 69 and Driving Trailer 749. However, TransLink, as a gesture of goodwill, painted these last two rail cars in their iconic maroon and blue livery before they were sent off to the DCDR. But little did the DCDR know that this paint job was really hiding a sinister secret. Following the delivery of the 80 class to its new home in preservation at Downpatrick, the first order of business was start up. On Saturday the 26th of May 2018, just a fortnight after they arrived at the railway, 80 class Power Car 69 was fired up, bringing with it a new era for the Heritage Railway as she ventured further and further into the world of diesel preservation. Following this, the DCDR were understandably excited to begin their driver training on the new rail cars, and in June of that same year, they did just that. However, after the arrival of the rail cars, it was observed that rapid deterioration of 749's roof was taking place. This was due to TransLink not having time to properly paint the vehicle, as they were in the midst of a major refurbishment program of their calf rolling stock. The DCDR took decisive action to prevent further corrosion and got work on scraping down and repainting 749's roof, saving it from a slow, painful death. Unfortunately, further disaster bestowed itself upon the DCDR in the form of COVID-19. The virus caused havoc for the railway by preventing public runnings for months on end during the various lockdowns, and whilst the railway was closed all that time, the newly repainted 80 class rail cars were forced to sit outside in the elements for the duration of the closure. This led to the discovery of rust bubbles which had formed around the majority of the windows on Power Car 69. The decision was then made to bring 69 into the workshop to address its own roof corrosion problems and treat the roof the same way they had previously done with 749, as at the time the rust bubbles were not a major concern. However, as posted to their YouTube channel in March of 2023, this effort began to be in vain. As the prep work on 69's roof began, they found some concerning holes in the roof near the gangway connection. As they poked and prodded, they soon discovered a worst case scenario of rust and corrosion, which DCDR chairman Robert Gardner described as
corrosion right where you don't want it.
After a long and difficult period of discussion, it was decided in early 2023 that the most logical course of action was to temporarily retire Power Car 69 from service so that she could undergo a major restoration project in the DCDR's workshop. Along with the restoration of the bodywork, which required the entire vehicle to be stripped in various places, including all of its windows removed, 69's interior was now going to get some badly needed TLC, such as reorganising the seating arrangement to allow multiple wheelchair users to sit at a window, and removing the 1990s vinyl wall coverings that had been laid on top of the original 1970s Formica. Through 2023, 69 was worked on as much as possible, but the 2023 running season was the DCDR's first year of operations since COVID, and thus all hands were primarily on the running of public train services throughout the running season. Coming into late 2023, however, on the night after the final public running of the Halloween season, the Downpatrick and County Down Railway, as well as the town of Downpatrick itself, was hit by the worst flooding ever seen in its lifetime.
It was a wet weekend in many parts of the UK. And the bad news is that more of the same is to follow in the days ahead.
Just after locking up for the night, Storm Ciarán made landfall. With gusts reaching a tornadic 180 miles per hour in some regions, Storm Ciarán was destined to cause untold destruction on the British Isles. And whilst most of Northern Ireland was spared the worst, the low-lying areas of South Down were not. Over the course of a few hours that night, the record-breaking storm laid down a staggering 8 inches of rain, completely overwhelming the town's main river, the River Coyle. To make things worse, it was later reported that the Department for Infrastructure had failed to perform routine dredging of the River Coyle, which is prone to heavy silt buildup, leading to the river bursting its banks and allowing millions of cubic litres of water to rush into the town. By the next morning, on the 1st of November 2023, the town of Downpatrick had been absolutely devastated by the flooding, and with the majority of Downpatrick shopping being done in the Market Street area, the area that was hit with the worst flooding, this led to a near humanitarian issue as over half of the town's shops were practically destroyed overnight. However, the worst flooding had been given to the Downpatrick and County Down Railway. As the morning sun revealed the extent of the damage, volunteers were instructed to not come to the railway, as the town and the railway itself were completely impassable. At some point, the railheads were over 5 feet deep in water. With the majority of the DCDR's rails being at the same height, this meant that almost all of their preserved rolling stock had been dunked in floodwaters for an entire night, with some rolling stock being saturated right up to the top of their bogies. As the day of devastation came to an end, the floodwaters slowly began to retreat, but with Storm Debbie following close behind, they quickly rose again. But as hard as nature tried, the worst had already been done. Immediately as soon as the floodwaters had retreated enough to allow the volunteers to return to their beloved railway, they did. And that is when I felt the need to lend a hand wherever physically possible. Now, if you have an understanding of how trains work and how something like salt-ridden floodwater would affect their traction motors and axle boxes, then you may be able to appreciate what kind of work the volunteers spent their first 2 months trying to tackle. But by some stroke of luck, 450 Class 458 Antrim Castle had been stabled closer to the head shunt than any other piece of rolling stock that night, as it was the train being used for the previous night's Halloween runnings, and as such, its axle boxes had only been partially dunked in the floodwaters, with the end bogie of the power car being entirely spared from being soaked whatsoever. This meant that after we had cleared the moisture from its other axle boxes and re-greased them, 458 would essentially be the only piece of rolling stock capable of performing vital shunting of the other stricken carriages. The months that followed, leading up to the new year, were filled with anxiety as multiple storms made landfall every few weeks. And since the wetlands around Downpatrick were still struggling to shrug off the original floodwaters of Storm Ciarán, each new storm brought a rise in floodwaters that made everyone sick with paranoia. Thankfully though, no further destruction was caused for the railway, and as 2024 rolled through the door, so did all of the work that needed to be done in order to have the railway opened to the public again. This, of course, implied that the 2024 January Diesel Gala had to be cancelled, but as a gesture of goodwill, the vast majority of people who had already booked tickets for the gala chose to not take a refund as an impromptu donation to assist with the DCDR with their recovery. Through 2024, the restoration of the 80 class was essentially off the cards for many months, but as summer started to show its face, bringing along with it the safety of dry weather, the prospect for restoration became a real priority once again. The first major post-flood job was the repair of all of the 80 class's batteries, as they had been badly damaged by the floodwaters, as well as lost all of their charge. Alongside this, the axle boxes of Power Car 69, Power Car 90 and Driving Trailer 749 had to be dried and re-greased. After this, 69's long-awaited electrical and mechanical restoration works could go ahead, along with the interior clean and refit. Through the summer months and towards the start of autumn, the restoration of Power Car 69 has been a lengthy yet successful venture, and despite the endless rust holes that led to more rust holes, they were quickly hunted down, cut out, treated and had fresh steel welded in. Additionally, the interior was completely stripped and window frames treated and repaired of their corrosion too. As of current, Power Car 69 is having its interior reassembled and its roof repainted. With most of the electrical and mechanical maintenance squared away, the prospect of a test run looms on the horizon. But what do the volunteers of Downpatrick have to say about the 80 class and its long, convoluted lifespan?
One of the consequences of the 2023 flood was that it set the 80 class restoration back. This was a restoration that had already been protracted by the discovery of more problems than we had initially anticipated. When the flood hit, the power car was in the workshop receiving attention to the roof and a few other areas. And of course the flood meant that we then had to stop that work, both to address problems with our other vehicles, which were more immediately required to get the railway back into service, but also address issues with the 80 class railcar itself, such as the traction motors, the axle boxes, both of which had sustained some minor flood damage. Thankfully, that has now been addressed and the restoration has continued. Part of the reason we were able to get those flood issues addressed so quickly was an influx of new volunteers who joined in the wake of the flood to help us out, for which we're very grateful. We could always use more volunteers, however, so the more volunteers we have, the closer we'll get to getting the 80 class out into service soon. As you can see, the carriage we're in was beautifully restored before the flood occurred, over a 2 or 3 year period from the vehicle's arrival in 2018 up until during the middle of the COVID pandemic. The other vehicle, the power car, is coming along nicely and hopefully soon will look just as good as the driving trailer we're in. Perhaps if the flood hadn't happened, we might have had the 80 class ready for our Halloween trains, which are coming up on the 26th to 27th of October. We'll be using the 450 for that instead, and hopefully we'll have the 80 class ready for our trains early in 2025.
Hello, my name is Shane McKee, and I have been volunteering at the DCDR for the past 2 years of my life. After the floods hit, we had to drain the axe boxes, which you can see are present here. We did this on all vehicles. Taking this bit off here first, you had to drain the water out, put new grease in and put it up again. It was a long and hard journey. It took us a month to do. So we got it all done on the 80 class, now we can finally run these things again. It was a long hard journey, but in the end it was worth it.
Hello, my name is Christopher and I'm a volunteer here at the Downpatrick and County Down Railway. I've been volunteering here roughly about a year, and one of the main projects that I've been working on in that time is the 80 class that we stand in. So some of the work that I've been doing on the 80 class involves some of the electrical work, so replacing breakers that needed swapped out, and also some of the metal work, so replacing some of the side panelling on the locomotive itself. Generally with time and age, we start to see some rust spots, so it's really important for our heritage carriages and locomotives that we keep them in good shape. So the work that I'm sort of mainly involved with at the minute is some of the restoration of some of the side panels on the locomotive. So that sort of work typically involves cutting out sections and then generating effectively a new replacement for them. Whenever we do that, we try to make sure that it's future-proofed. So we use a product that effectively doesn't allow any future corrosion. Once we've done that, then it's on to bodywork and painting. And for me, it's really rewarding to see sort of the final locomotive come together. In terms of the future then, I think it's very bright for the 80 class. So we're hoping to have this locomotive back out in service and enjoyed by the public. And hopefully we should see that within the next year or so. For me, that's a really rewarding element of what we do here and one of the reasons why I love volunteering here.
At the time of this recording, the 80 class's restoration continues at pace. While she won't be ready for public runnings for at least another few months, her story is yet to be finished. If you would like to be part of that story in any way, shape or form, then I implore you to consider donating to the Downpatrick and County Down Railway, as every penny is quite literally helping preserve a historical artefact that would otherwise have been lost to time years ago. And if you want to go one step further, then consider becoming a volunteer. Contact the DCDR via any of their social networking accounts, and so long as you're over the age of 16, you could be a part of the 80 class's history in a way that will be remembered for generations. I will now close this documentary with a statement from the late Noel Playfair that perfectly sums up what these trains meant to a man that spent the majority of his life driving them.
I'll miss this sort of train because it's uncomplicated, it's very easy to drive, and normally if you look after it, it never lets you down. It'll keep plodding away. They've been all over Ireland, been to Cork, Kilkenny, Galway in these trains, and actually they're good sets and they're a very good buy.